Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We still have a few people joining, so we're going to start in a few minutes. Hello, my name is Brian DiPaolo, and I am the Strategic Services Practice Director at Accudata Systems. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our webinar, Can Your Data Recover from a Modern Disaster? We have an informative and thought-provoking presentation for you today that will cover changes we're seeing around data protection and business continuity that no longer aligns with the traditional model. Accudata has been at the forefront of technology innovation since we were founded in 1982. Since that time, we've invested heavily in emerging technologies that we see as transformative to our customers' way of doing business. Over the past 34 years, we've built a team of highly skilled local consultants who partner with our clients to improve business through IT. We've understood from the very beginning the power of sharing data. Getting data to those who need it securely and quickly is how companies find a competitive advantage. This is why today's topic is more critical than ever before. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Mark MacArthur is an advisory services solution architect. Mark has over 30 years experience with business continuity and disaster recovery. He is a certified business continuity professional, and he has a strong history of helping clients improve their risk management processes. Joseph Huff is our data center solution architect. Joseph has been involved with data center technologies for more than 15 years. He has worked with businesses of every size and is at the forefront of modern data center design and the technologies that enable it. Without further delay, I want to thank you for your time and introduce Mark MacArthur, who will talk about how the face of business continuity is changing.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us with our webinar. Today we're going to talk about data protection, recovering after disasters, and the recovery methods used after a cyber incident. In fact, we're going to focus on that a lot during the presentation today. Before I begin, let me tell you a little bit about myself and my experience in data recovery. Started off as a systems engineer over 30 years ago and specialized in data protection early on. First using the traditional take backup and then adding replication for disaster recovery as the technology progressed. And then I moved into disaster recovery and business continuity full time. So I've been in this space for about 25 years. In fact, when I started, the term business continuity planning didn't even exist. It was called contingency planning. There were no best practices. Everybody pretty much made it up as they went along. And then in 1988, DRI, or the Disaster Recovery Institute, formed and standardized the approach for business continuity and disaster recovery planning. So as you can see on the slide, this is a very high level of the traditional business continuity planning model, and it's been a standard for disaster recovery and business continuity planning for a while, and it's worked very well. Now, I'll take a minute to discuss the first few steps because these are the steps that are often overlooked or maybe not enough time is spent. So the number one would be risk assessments and business impact analyses. The risk assessment, the purpose for that is to identify the risks and threats and vulnerabilities specific to your business. And historically, the most common risks have been natural disasters, power failures, fire, explosions, just to name a few. But that's the main group that has been added over time. And then the next step, we conduct a business impact analysis. Now this is where you're going to get your business requirements. So you're going to identify all your business processes, recovery time objectives for those processes, staffing requirements and dependencies. And then you're also going to identify the application dependencies and their RTOs and recovery point objectives. So for those of you that aren't familiar with some of those terms, recovery time objective is how quickly a business process, application, or data needs to be available after a disaster before it severely affects the business. And the recovery point objective, quite simply, is how much data can you afford to lose. Some processes or applications you can afford to lose, say 24 hours of data, you go back to last night's backup and you'll be fine. But other applications, it may be either more aggressive or you can wait even longer depending on how often the data moves or changes. So this basically provides the business requirements for moving forward and doing business continuity and disaster recovery. And we would argue for data recovery in general. These are the business requirements for data recovery. So after the business requirements are gathered, we can continue to the second and third steps, which are where we can develop business continuity plans and then also design and implement disaster recovery solutions to, at the very least, meet the recovery time and recovery point objectives that were established through the BIA. Now again, this process has worked very well, but the world is changing. And in fact, I don't recall a time where this space has changed faster than it has over the past few years. So what's changed? Well, we have a lot of cyber attacks, ransomware, and for ransomware, global ransomware cases have increased by almost 170% in 2015 alone. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, the most common form of ransomware is an attack where your data gets encrypted, and in order to get the encryption key, you have to pay the ransom. So think about it, someone clicks on something in email, and in the background, all the data that they can access gets encrypted. So companies are implementing security measures to protect themselves, but no security measures are 100% foolproof. You do want to minimize the risk, but you also need to be prepared to recover. So let's talk about two companies that experienced a data breach. First is Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. By using malware, hackers were able to encrypt large portions of their data. Patient data was affected and many services had to be stopped. In fact, some patients even need to be transported to other facilities because the data that was depended on for their treatment wasn't available. So imagine the effect on their reputation and also their revenue. They were not allowed to, they could not bring in any new patients. They had to transport patients out of the hospital, and also they lost a lot of trust in the industry. So when after the ransomware attack, they looked at how they can get all their data back. And at first, they realized that restoring their data from backup would take too long. They had so much data that was encrypted that it would take days or even weeks to recover it all. So they decided that the best thing to do was to actually pay the ransom. So they paid 40 Bitcoin or $17,000, and they got the encryption key and unencrypted all of their data. So one thing that you may ask is, why didn't they have a disaster recovery solution? Well, the answer there is they did have a recovery solution, but the encrypted data was already replicated to their DR site by the time they realized that there was a problem. So failing over to DR wasn't going to buy them anything. They had to depend on their backups. And another example is CodeSpaces. Now, CodeSpaces was an online source code management service set up on Amazon Web Services, or AWS. They touted how secure their platform was, their ability to recovery, and basically it was just the best place for you to store your code. So unfortunately, hackers got control of the AWS control panel, and they started a denial of service attack and then demanded a ransom. So when code services saw this and realized what was going on, first thing they did, which is like many companies would do, is try to shut down the access for the hackers. Well, when the hackers saw what was happening, they started deleting virtual servers, data stores, and even backups that were stored in that same location. So unfortunately for code spaces, they weren't following the 3-2-1 backup rule of having 3 copies of all data, 2 on-site and 1 off-site. So since all of their data and backups were deleted, code spaces never opened for business again. It put them out of business. So what are companies doing to combat this threat? Well, they're implementing security measures and they're developing cyber incident response plans. So Accudata works with a lot of companies, and we're developing incident response plans for a lot of the firms in Houston. And we're seeing some patterns when we show up. So typically, developing an incident response plan has been viewed as a data security responsibility. And there's some good reasons for that. But from what we've seen, companies that have an incident response plan usually develop it separately, and it's not integrated into their BCP or DR programs at all. In fact, we haven't even seen data sharing between the 2 programs. So the question that I have for you is, we talked a lot about requirements. Does your incident response plan, if you have one, even consider RTOs? Because we haven't seen one so far that does. Now remember, the recovery time objective is the amount of time in which a service, system, or application needs to be recovered before it severely impacts the business. So the bottom line is RTOs are the business requirement for recovery, period. And they need to be considered when planning for a recovery after a breach. So the key to any effective data protection program is to implement solutions based on the business requirements and the threats that you may need to respond to. So if the business is supplying their business requirements for recovery when you're doing business impact analysis, that needs to be considered in when you're dealing with all the threats that you might run into. And here's another observation. We've found that most of the companies that can meet their RTOs after a disaster like the loss of a data center may not be able to recover fast enough from ransomware. We're going to get into a little more detail on that later in the program. But we'd like to take a moment to poll the audience about considering RTOs in their incident response plans. We'll give you about 10-15 seconds, and if you'd answer the poll that's on your screen, we'd appreciate it. Thank you for responding. So on to the modern disaster. The risk and threats that existed years ago have evolved, and we'd argue the process should as well. At Accudata, we believe that data protection should be heavily integrated into your business continuity program. Cyber attacks such as malware, Trojans, and ransomware need to be considered as threats when you're conducting a risk assessment. That's the first step in business continuity, and you want to add those as threats right from the start. The RTOs and RPOs that are identified in a BIA should be used as a business requirement for defining any type of recovery solution. Data protection should be at least considered throughout the entire BCP process from beginning to end. So I'll ask, do you know what you'll do if your data is compromised through a cyber attack? Have you even considered that yet? And then on top of that, and I know this is going to be news to some folks, is what will you do when your compromised data has already been replicated to your disaster recovery site? So as you can see, this is a little different than recovering from a data center loss. So, and also something to consider or think about is, can your local backups recover the data fast enough to meet your recovery time objectives? Most companies, they're optimizing their backups so they can complete in backup windows each night, but they're not necessarily optimized for speed and recovery. So there are many parts of an incident response plan, but for today we're going to focus on data recovery. I'm going to turn this over to Joseph to speak about that in a minute. But before I do, let's talk about some other reasons why you may want to combine 2 programs or the 3 programs of business continuity planning, disaster recovery, and incident response. We believe that cyber attacks and ransomware should be considered another type of disaster or threat. And DRI agrees and is analyzing how to integrate cyber incident response into their standard BCP process. In fact, they've already started. If you go to DRI's site, drii.org, you'll see that they're already starting to talk about incident response and integrating it into their program. Hasn't been fully vetted yet, but they are working on it. And so what are some of the other advantages of integrating your programs? Well, if you're developing an incident response plan, you might as well leverage what's already in place and what's been developed for a business continuity plan. If you think about it, when you're doing an incident response plan, in addition to the things that are specific to that incident, notifying certain government agencies, things like that, you're going to want to name a a management team to make business decisions. Well, that's probably the same people that are involved in a business continuity management team in your business continuity plan. And also, take advantage of what's already been developed in your BCPs. They have an activation process, communication plans, roles and responsibilities, how teams interact. Now think about it. If you're recovering from an incident, at some point it's going to be management communicating with your IT departments the same way as they would when it's a disaster and business continuity management teams are activating IT folks to implement their disaster recovery plans and execute all of that. So all of those processes are probably already developed. So it makes sense to leverage that and keep one single program so everybody understands exactly what they're supposed to do when it comes to any incident. Now, we've talked about this with a number of our customers, and there was some resistance, but it's always comes down to the same reason. And what that was ownership and maintenance of plans. So for example, if you have somebody that's writing an incident response plan, they don't necessarily want BCP folks editing their plan because they're responsible for it, right? And the BCP folks don't want somebody editing their plan. Well, this issue is not exactly new if you think about it, because when you have a business continuity plan, usually your disaster recovery plans are separate already. So you have your technical folks writing your disaster recovery plans, and your BCP and business folks responsible for the business continuity plans. And basically what's worked out is how they interact. They can be separate documents owned by specific individuals, but there are integration points. They understand how activation will be handled, how communications will be handled, what roles everybody has. It's already there. And so you can keep ownership of documentation. You can keep them separate if you like, but you can also leverage the other plans by having certain integration points there. And also one thing that we'd like to recommend is the next time you're doing a BCP exercise, consider a data security breach or a cyber attack as a scenario for that exercise. We're doing it ourselves, and it's been an eye-opening experience, and we've learned a lot. And I think it's really helped us get better preparing for any issues we might run into. So we've looked at some of the advantages of integrating processes. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joseph to discuss the technology behind modern data protection. Joseph?
Thanks a lot, Mark. So I just want to take a few seconds and kind of echo what Mark has been describing when it comes to incident response and ransomware. I've been in IT for almost 20 years, 15 of that pretty much focused on the data center. And if there's one constant that I've seen is change. So we need to keep adapting and changing with the threats that are happening in our environments. So with that being said, I want to continue kind of the theme that Mark has been going on around business requirements and gathering those and working in IT, working with the business. So one of the things that we want to highlight that we've talked in other sessions is around classifying your data. And one of the reasons you want to do that is it really helps us from an IT perspective protect, restore, and get the data back up and running very effectively. Because here's the thing, not all data is created equally. Not all data is accessed equally, and not all data relative to the business is equal. So it's really important that we kind of create buckets for our data. So in this example I've got here from a customer, we've identified 4 different buckets that were relevant to their business: public, sensitive, confidential, regulatory. So depending on your business, you may have similar buckets, or maybe you don't have any regulatory requirements. But the idea is to kind of put data into categories so that we can then identify different maybe threat vectors, access, things that may happen, and then we can categorize that so that we can, first of all, protect it accordingly, second of all, give access to the data accordingly, and then make sure our response is matching what the business requires in those different areas. So it really helps identify how we're going to move forward when it comes to data protection. So with that said, I'll kind of jump into some of the meat of what I'm going to be talking about today. So I've been around for a while, and one of the things that I've noticed is that it's very critical to go through what Mark has done as far as identifying those requirements, building those impact analysis, putting together those business continuity plans so that we can provide a thorough data protection strategy. Now, in my experience, in the 6 years here at Accudata as a consultant, I've noticed that not every company has had the chance or the opportunity to go through those processes. But at the same time, they're still IT is still doing a really good job of backing up data. So for the most part, they're following that 3-2-1 rule. The 3-2-1 rule basically means 3 copies of your data, 2 on 2 different types of media, and then 1 is going to be offsite. And those usually follow a weekly, monthly full backup, incremental throughout the week to capture all those changes. And it's doing a pretty good job of that. Then we have customers that have those critical applications that need better than 24 hours. They're doing some type of replication to a DR facility, much like Mark has described previously. And that gives the customer the ability that in the disaster or facility outage, they can bring those applications up fairly quickly. And with all that, they're able to get through those 2 different mechanisms. They're able to provide that level of recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives that are critical to the business so that everything just keeps running. Now, in most of these instances, this works great. I've implemented it myself, and they typically work fine, and customers are very happy with those outcomes. However, in this changing landscape of threats with cyber attacks and ransomwares, our strategies do have to change a little bit, because those customers that are just doing backups, right? We're doing backups, we send those tapes off site, and everything's fine, but in the event of a cyber attack or ransomware, the best we can do probably is a 24-hour restore if we're doing tape. And that sometimes just is not going to cut it. So then we have replication. So as the amount of data grew and these backups are taking more and more time and it's going to take longer to restore them in the event of an issue, we started using replication, which was great because now we can replicate data to an offsite location and bring it up fairly quickly. But much like Mark described earlier, that may not be the case when it comes to ransomware. Because what happens if the other array is now infected or the replication target is now affected? How are we going to be able to handle that? So we have different ways of replication, and I'll give that here just for a few minutes for those that aren't aware. So there's a couple of different types of replications that we talk about and how this happens. We have array-based replication. So through our partnerships, we have different technologies in that space where we replicate one LUN from our primary storage to our secondary storage. And we're trying to keep that up to date as much as possible. So sometimes 15 minutes to an hour replication windows are happening. In the event of a cyber issue, well, that is now replicated to the other side. And then we have application replication, which is a mouthful in itself. But these are, if you've upgraded to Exchange 2010, you've had the DAG. If you're doing SQL, you've had log shipping. These are application ways of replicating the data and keeping it consistent on both sides. In the event of Exchange, that's happening almost real time. So if something gets infected, it's already replicated to the other side. Log shipping, in my experience, we've been doing it for a long time. It's usually every 15 minutes or so. If you don't catch in those 15 minutes, I've now replicated that to the SQL database on the other side. There's also virtual machine replication. So I think it was if you're virtualized with VMware or Hyper-V, there's ways to replicate VMs from one side to the other. And you're usually doing that in the same type of manner, a 15-minute window, maybe an hour window, maybe it's 4 hours depending on the criticality of that particular VM. But in the same fashion, we're replicating that issue to the other side. So again, this is great in the event of a disaster. We can get those things back up and running, and with as little data loss, and get those up very quickly. However, when we're looking at it from a cybersecurity event, we may have affected our other side. So we have to come up with other ways to protect ourselves from that particular event. And the way I like to look at it is kind of a defense in-depth strategy is what I like to call it. So if you're a football fan like me, if you live in Texas, how can you not be a football fan? I look at a defense in-depth strategy like a football defense. So you have defensive linemen, and I'm going to highlight J.J. Watt, because if you're not a football fan, you probably still have heard of J.J. Watt, right? So we have this defense in-depth strategy. We have defensive linemen, we have linebackers, we have defensive backs that are all protecting the goal line from the offense, right? The idea is to keep them from scoring. So this graphic here is kind of demonstrating my defense in-depth strategy, is you have backups. This is the end-all be-all protection of all your data in the environment. And that's going to give you the breadth of all your data, but it's also going to give you probably the longest recovery time. Again, probably up to 24 hours is typically what we see in the environment. And then you're going to have disaster recovery. So this is your way of getting data off-site, real-time, being able to restore it very quickly. And then the last one I'll talk about is kind of a new one that I haven't mentioned yet, is leveraging local snapshots. So local snapshots are something that we've really seen come into the fold recently. A lot of times it's already integrated into your current storage platforms. However, people aren't really leveraging this as a way to recover data. A lot of times these are, in these newer arrays, they're application aware. We can get consistent copies of VMs and databases and those types of things. And it's going to be something that can be restored fairly quickly. So like a football team, this defense in-depth strategy can really help from getting data restored, whether it's a human error in that a user has deleted an Excel spreadsheet and they need it from last week, last month, to an incident, a natural disaster, or a pallet failure at a facility. We have disaster recovery plans. They can then fill those applications over. And in the event of a ransomware attack on a specific user, we can provide levels of snapshots where we can basically run a quick command and we can resort that data to a specific point in time by rolling it back to right before that particular incident, thus giving us minimal data loss and quick recovery times from those different aspects. Now, we've been focused a lot on procedures, we've been focused a lot on data protection from a back-end perspective, and one might think, well, I have firewalls, I have web content filtering, I have all these things in place, so why should I be worried about this? Well, Accudata is a fully integrated company with all different types of solutions, and we do focus on the front end. Those things are important. You do need firewalls. You do need web content filtering. You need IPS and all these cool things on the front end. But I'm gonna equate it to parenting. So I'm a parent. I have 3 kids, and I do everything I can to protect my kids. Right? Make them wear helmets when they ride their bikes. I make them lock their door. We put fences up. We guard them from falling into the pool, and all these kind of things to protect our kids from getting hurt. Well, like our end users, we try to protect them by putting these things on the edge to protect them, but you're still going to have that user that clicks on that link from Nigeria because they're going to win some prize, and it happens, and that's going to be infected. So we have to be able to provide that way of recovery. Now, just like if your kids get hurt or these cyber incidents happen, you may ask yourself, what could I have done differently? You know, why did this happen, and how can I prevent it from happening again? And that's where I'd say this is where you can leverage Accudata as your trusted advisor. You know, we do things on the security side where we have a very extensive branch of people that are focused on security, and then we have guys like Mark who are very integrated into the business processes to be able to design the business impact analysis and BCPs. And then guys like myself who are data center focused, who can help build these data protection strategies around protecting the data. So to kind of sum all that up, I've come up with some use cases here that we've focused here on Accudata with real-life customers. And I kind of wanted to highlight those here to kind of paint the big picture on where all this kind of comes together. So this particular customer, they actually had done a lot of work around doing a business impact analysis. They had built a business continuity plan, and they had a DR strategy. The problem was it was old, so they hadn't really tested it out in quite some time. It was probably 18 months old or so. They had people had left, and new people have filled in new roles, so they weren't aware of how they were going to integrate into that management team. And then their current DR plan didn't line up with their new technology that they had in their data center. So the challenge was, how do they align all this stuff up? How do we get the people upgraded to understand what their processes are? How do we get the document updated with the new replications and new technology? So we as Accudata came in with our advisory services and our data center team to kind of really identify the gaps in their current processes and plans, went through their business impact analysis again to make sure everything was still up to date and all the applications were identified. And then really, from that perspective, once those documents are updated, we're able to optimize their current DR plan with the existing technology they already had. So by upgrading to the latest technology with virtualization, storage, and servers, we're able to leverage the stuff that they already had in place to provide the business continuity and data protection they were going to need moving forward, whether that was a natural disaster or if it was an incident response plan where somebody got compromised of data. The next one is a customer here in Houston as well that was an oil and gas customer. They had a few gaps in their data protection plan. They realized that they were getting larger and their tape backup solution was not going to provide the level of recovery point objectives or recovery time objectives that they were going to need. Some of their backups were taking anywhere from 24 to 48 hours old, and that just wasn't going to be sufficient to meet all of their recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. One of the challenges they had was they needed to upgrade their solution. The solution was 5 years old and it was not going to be able to meet those point objectives that they needed. But part of that was they had never really done a business impact analysis before. They really didn't have a business continuity plan. So one of the things that we did for them is we came in and started that process for them. How do we get them? How do we design a solution if we don't know what the requirements are? So our advisory services folks came in and helped them build that business continuity plan based on a business impact analysis. We also helped them with a decision support matrix. So Accudata has a lot of different partnerships with a lot of different providers. And what we try to do is marry those partnerships with the requirements of the business. So we help them build a decision support matrix, identifying their requirements, and then plugging in those solutions that would make the most sense based on their requirements and based on cost justification. Because this was an oil and gas company, and let's face it, oil is not where we'd like it to be. So we made sure that going through that process, it not only was something that was going to meet their requirements, but was also going to fit into their budget as well. So a really cool project that came out of that, and the customer was very happy with the outcome of that. The last one I want to highlight is another customer here. They had a new CIO come in, and basically the question was, I'm new to Houston. We have hurricanes here. Can we fail over if an incident happens? To which that sparked a whole bunch of conversations internally to which we got engaged. Because the question was, they didn't know. They had tested it, and the challenge was we just didn't know what we had. We didn't know if we had the right tools. All those different things were big questions to the customer. So one of the things we came in and did is we worked in parallel with the IT folks and the business folks, and we had our advisory services working on the business to create that business impact analysis, building those BC plans, and while that's going on, we had our data center senior architects coming in and doing full assessments on what they had. Their servers, their storage, their current backup plans, what they were leveraging for replication, and at the end of those discoveries, we were able to get together with advisory services and the data center teams to then build out what that data protection strategy would look like. And to come to find out, they already had the tools in place. It was just a matter of building those out and then making all those requirements into realities and making sure that they had the ability to fail over from one data center to the other. So one thing that I want to make sure that is as part of this as well is each one of these different scenarios, we were focused on disaster recovery, business impact analysis, building up business continuity plans, but incident response was a part of all those. So being able to integrate all those together was something new and something that the customer really got a lot of value out of. So with that being said, just to kind of sum up, all this that we've been talking about today, the really key thing that I want to make aware is that, Accudata is here, and we wholly believe that a solid data protection strategy is the answer to combating this ransomware and cyber issues that we're seeing today. And by collaborating with us, with the business, with IT, building these DR and business continuity plans is the best way to respond, and if you do, in fact, do get compromised in your business. So with that said, I'll hand it back over to Brian. If you have questions, please let us know, and we'll get going with that.
Thanks, Joseph. At this time, we'll begin our Q&A session with Mark and Joseph. During the webinar, we received a number of questions we're going to go through, but feel free to submit additional questions as the discussion continues, and we'll go from there. But to start off, I'm going to go back to Mark. And the first question is, how necessary is a business impact analysis?
Well, business impact analysis, in my experience, is one of the most critical portions of any of these programs because it supplies the business requirements that you base all your decisions on in business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, and hopefully when you're creating incident response plans. So if you think about it this way, what I've seen in my career is when people don't do an extensive BIA, they're guessing at a lot of the data, and they're not gathering information like about workarounds. So you've got a critical process that needs to be recovered in a day, and maybe they have a workaround that would work for 3 or 4 days. So if you don't have that information, you end up gold-plating a lot of your solutions. So when you're thinking about, well, you're saving money by not spending a lot of time on your business impact analysis, in most cases, you're actually costing yourself money because down the line, you're either going to gold plate your solutions and come up with recovery methods or implementations that exceed the requirements, or you're going to maybe be short where you're not meeting the business requirements. So it's like any project, or if you're a PMP, one of the most important things that you're going to need when you're managing a project is you need to make sure that you understand the business requirements before you even start.
Thanks, Mark. No, good feedback. I guess continuing on that same topic, how long does a business continuity plan or a BIA take?
I wish I could answer that question better. It really depends on the organization. If there's a smaller company that doesn't have a lot of business processes, it could be done pretty quickly. In large corporations, it can take a while. Okay.
Well, so today's topic's been focused on business continuity as well as incident response. So, in how these have been completed, do you have to complete both the BIA and business continuity plan before you can develop the IR plan, or is there dependencies there?
No, actually, after you have your business impact analysis, you have all the requirements to develop. If you do it right, that is, you have all the requirements to develop your disaster recovery solutions and DR plans, business continuity plans, and incident response plans. So there needs to be a lot of coordination between them if you want to integrate like activation and things like that, but there's no reason why you can't start on all 3 of them at the same time. In fact, in our experience, that's what we typically do. We'll have people focusing on incident response while one team is working on the business continuity plan, and then we have our technical folks doing the DR solutions. But we meet regularly, talk about what those integration points are going to be, and we pretty much can do all of them simultaneously.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to move from the process side over to the technology side based on some of these questions. So Joseph, can you give me some more information around using snapshots versus backups in the ransomware scenario?
Sure. So like I was mentioning before, most of our environments are pretty virtualized, or they have some type of storage in the back end. And a lot of times snapshots are already built into that. And being able to do application-aware snapshots, they take very little space typically, and can usually happen pretty quickly. So we can take multiple versions of that. Where more than likely backups is more of a data protection archive solution. So when you use backups, you typically do those once a day in the evenings, and then that's stored for whatever retention level you need it. Maybe it's 30, 90, 7-year retention, depending on what it is. So the reason I like to use snapshots is it's going to give you a much quicker way to restore, and as well as prevent the most data loss.
Hey, Brian, I'm going to add something to that as well. Is when you're building out snapshots, there's a cost associated with that, and it's not necessarily expensive. But if you complete your business impact analysis and you fully understand what data is critical and how quickly it needs to be recovered, you can be very cost effective on deciding what data you're using snapshots for, because you may not necessarily need to do that for everything. So you can be much more cost effective if you get the requirements up front.
Thank you, Mark. So I guess so I'll jump down to so what are the vendors that we work with or recommend for these snapshot technologies?
So here at Accudata, we have a couple different partnerships with different storage vendors and backup vendors as well. So my answer to that would be we have the big players, so EMC, Nimble, NetApp, Veeam, just to name a few of our partnerships. So it really depends on, I'm going to still one of Mark's things, I said it depends on what your requirements are. So each one brings something unique to the table, and it's going to be dependent on what is your requirements are, and then what your budget is on which one may make the most sense. So my advice would be, let's come in, have a whiteboard session, and talk about your requirements, and then we can help you identify what those products need to be and what they need to do.
Thanks, Joseph. So it appears that's the end of the questions at this time. In terms of next step, I want to thank Mark and Joseph, as well as I want to thank all of you for joining this morning. As you continue to develop your business continuity and data protection plans, keep Accudata in mind. We perform a variety of complementary health checks along with business continuity and disaster recovery workshop. These are valuable reviews that enable you to understand your current state of technology and process in order to determine the right next steps for your organization. If you're interested in finding out more, feel free to contact your account manager or email me directly, including any additional questions you may have after today's session. And that's at my email address is on the presentation and will be sent out afterwards. You'll receive an email link afterwards you'll receive an email with a link to additional resources, including the announcement of our winner of the Parrot quadricopter drone giveaway. Again, thank you again for joining today, and have a great day.